project for this fall. As you know, the book is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and we have some wonderful faculty people here, although I'm not sure what Fred's doing here. But,
I was invited.
but we have some wonderful panelists, and I'm going to get out of the way so we can, please help yourself to the cookies and the refreshments. You know, this is quite a, it can be quite a serious topic, as your book was last year with the Tuesdays with Maury. There are deep topics to explore, as well as kind of light and over the top. So I hope we will run the full gamut throughout the semester, and I'm trying to persuade the ringleaders of this project to maybe extend it into the spring as well. There's just so many people that I've encountered that would want to participate and couldn't make it in the fall. So let's keep that option open, and let's go ahead with the wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to Denise, and thank you again for coming. It's very important that we have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. So also thank you for coming. This project cannot happen if faculty don't buy in and use the book in their courses. Thanks to all of you that were here, and we're continuing to be here for the 3rd year in a row. I have a little display on the table back there of all 3 of our one-book projects, beginning with Persepolis, and then last year Tuesdays with Maury, and now, of course, The Things They Carried. So this book has generated a lot of interest, and we have lots of wonderful things planned. Please keep an eye on the Buzz, where we'll have all the information on our Facebook page. If you can check that out and maybe join up. And is it still Become a Friend? No, it seems to be something with like.
I think you have to like it.
Yeah. Like, okay. Anyway.
I don't really know the difference.
I don't know either. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And I also want to especially thank these 5 kind folks for agreeing to be on the panel. They'll be representing psychology, history, and English from various perspectives. And then once every person has talked about how he or she will be incorporating the book, you feel free to have a general discussion, question and answer. And being Italian, I have to reiterate what President Sbrega said, please eat something. So thank you, and Fred, would you mind beginning?
Oh, that's why this chair was What can I say now? I'm on the spot. I'm happy to participate in the One Book Initiative. I teach 2 sections of abnormal psychology here online. And I've chosen to use the book in 2 different ways. The most obvious and easiest way is the way I have the course designed. There's basically a disorder a week as we progress through the semester. And there are a number of specific disorders that the military has treated or not treated so well with the current war, especially around diagnosis, treatment, and discharge related to PTSD, as well as diagnosis, treatment, and discharge related to personality disorders. At least around personality disorders, for example, someone discharged with such a diagnosis may not be entitled to any service or benefits because no one can prove that the personality disorder did not exist prior to entering the military. There are some issues around PTSD as well. If someone has a diagnosis of PTSD, they may not serve on the front line, for example, based on their previous diagnosis, regardless of any medical or psychiatric report. But for their term paper, I really didn't want to focus on a military issue for the book, even though it's obviously based about the Korean War. So what I'm doing for their term paper is asking them to think about the textbook in terms of a very ancient topic. I don't know anybody wants to learn about Freud anymore, but I do. So I'm actually having them consider the concept of a totem, both from very early historical evidence in terms of human societies, but also from the context of the book. What purpose do the totems serve that the various soldiers carry with them, either psychologically or a physical item? And hopefully, I don't know that they'll make the leap to look at modern day totems and what they serve, and we have a very obvious one, our cell phones, I think. If we think of totem as identifying clans like it did millions of years ago, the cell phone does the same thing in a very modern sense, in that we have a circle of friends, people have to be on our calling plan. You know, incest is not everyone's hot topic like it was back then, but it sort of still serves the same purpose as a way of identifying members of a particular group in a way that we don't necessarily consciously think of. And I think further, given the times we live in, totems really bind anxiety for us. Without the cell phone, I think our level of anxiety is far higher than it is with it. We live for it, it dictates our life. The things we used to associate with totems, the negative emotions, I'm not mad at my mother-in-law, the coffee mug is, or something like that, or the volcano or the weather is responsible for those feelings. The same way that the cell phone, I think, can direct and sort of be a lightning rod for some of those same thoughts. So those are the two ways I'm using it this semester. Next.
So I'm also teaching a couple of different psychology classes that I'm using the book in. An adolescent psychology class and the general psych class. So for the adolescent psych class, it isn't until the very end of the course that we talk about different kinds of, there's a chapter in the textbook on different kinds of problems that adolescents encounter that we would consider abnormal. And so I'm using it for that last textbook chapter. I'm using one of the stories. That was one of the things that I found really appealing about this book. As someone who doesn't teach an English class where you would normally assign novels, I don't normally, when I teach abnormal psych, I have assigned short stories, but I liked the feature of this book that made it easy to incorporate 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 stories without needing to assign the whole book. So for the adolescent psych class, we're looking at it through the lens of abnormality, but mostly with this question of, those of you who read the book, it's the story called On the Rainy River, which is a very, I think it's an easy story to approach from a perspective of ethical dilemmas that we face, and also why is it during adolescence and emerging adulthood that it's often someone who's not close to us, you know, not a family member, not a close friend, who can play a really crucial role in helping us change or make a decision or deal with an ethical dilemma. So I was going to connect it to the adolescent psych class that way, getting them to think a little bit about the roles that sometimes strangers can play in our lives during those years, and why is that such a crucial time in the lifespan for someone who we're not necessarily so close to have a significant impact. And I was also going to connect it to this subject that's really prevalent in psychology, the subject of resilience. You know, what makes us resilient? Why is this character the main character of that story and throughout the book? Why would you consider him resilient or not consider him resilient? So that's how I was planning to use it in the adolescent psych class. And in the Psych 101 class, I was going to start it. It was actually my plan to do this today in class, and it didn't come through because it ended up that there were some other issues that were unanticipated that took the class in a different direction today. So I'm going to start Monday's class with the first 15 minutes of class with Tim O'Brien reading a letter from one of his fans about the impact the book had on her relationship with her father. So I kind of wanted to introduce it to them that way and focus on the impact that this book seems to have had on generations, you know, a way for some people to learn more about their fathers in most cases, a way into understanding what their fathers' lives may have been like during this war, and trying to connect with them. So it's going to start with that and then have them read 3 of the stories. On the Rainy River. There's a short piece called Spin, which is all about memory and different memories of the war. So it's going to have them read that during the chapter on memory. And then in mid-November, when we covered stress and coping in Psych 101, I'm planning on having them read the chapter on the first chapter on the one called The Things They Carried, about, and have them focus a little bit on what they carry as community college students. What is it that they carry, what's the significance of that in their lives? So with the adolescent psych, just to wrap up, with the adolescent psych students, it's more of a focus, sort of a specific focus, and with the general psych students, it's more of a kind of smattering of relationship, memory, stress and coping, a little bit around the ethics.
Come on in if you want to.
Now for something a little different. We had two psych people. The course I'm using is History 114. I know Maureen teaches that course as well. And it's the second half of American history, which covers Reconstruction through the present, or as far as you can get in these survey courses. And although we also end up spending, I'm on the third week now, spending some time about earlier times because students even hadn't taken the previous course, or they forgot, like the Constitution, how that operates. But in any case, we've caught up, and the way in which I'm using, when I've taught history over the years and continue, I do try to, if it's appropriate, use a novel or work of fiction. For example, when I taught the survey of world history, I've used Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe because it focuses on certain things. And my purpose, and this book fits this perfectly, or at least very well, I want them to see that history is the story of all of us. I always talk about his story, her story, our story. As Maureen knows, as historiography has evolved so that it's not white men writing history as it did earlier, part of the 20th century or earlier, but it's including obviously women, African Americans, and gay people, and all kinds of things. Our history has expanded, bringing in all kinds of groups that were not featured earlier, and also dealing with their interests. But the other thing I like to feature is for them to understand that history affects all of us. It's not presidents, the generals, or even big people, Martin Luther King or whoever, but it's also ordinary people who make history. And how does that historical events affect their lives, as oftentimes it does. And war is a great example of that, where so-called ordinary people are living their lives and all of a sudden they're caught up in the maelstrom of a war, and they're taken to places that they never expected to be, and they're affected by it. Either people lose their lives, obviously, and that affects their whole family, or they come back and they have lots of trauma to deal with, as we know. Fred's talking about PTSD, and all the rest. So anyway, the point is that history, people live history, people are affected by history. So this novel, not a novel, we're talking about that one. We can talk about it. What is this? This is a genre that blurs the lines between so-called fiction and nonfiction. And this is going to come up because students want to know, did this really happen? Well, did it really happen, or what do we mean by it? Clearly, soldiers went through what O'Brien talks about. Did it happen exactly the way he says it? Well, I don't know. We don't know, but we'll be talking about that. But basically, my interest for them is for them to see how history affects individuals who get caught up in it, and not only, of course, for example, in this case, people fight the war, but also their families, and as it ripples through a society as a whole. Like most history teachers, I teach it chronologically, and so I have it scheduled to read beginning around November 2nd, hopefully. We all fall behind, but I want to make sure that as we get to the 60s, and the Vietnam War, or even earlier, because the Vietnam War actually had its precedents go back to the end of World War II. we begin to read it, and then we're going to be talking about it, and they'll be writing about it. One of the things I have them do every week is a reaction paper to what they read. And so that'll be the focus of a couple of different reaction papers that they will do, and we'll connect it with the events that we'll be talking about. I'm also, I usually have them do some sort of research project, be it a paper or some other way of projecting their research, and we're focusing on the 60s. What a surprise. I said my favorite decade. Yeah. But so they're doing various research projects around the 60s. This obviously takes place during the 60s, and we'll be talking about that, the experience, how this book and what they learn relates to maybe their own research, although they may be doing a variety of different types of research. But anyway, the importance of the novel for me, I keep saying novel, right? Well, my colleagues here will deal with those genres, will be for them, again, to understand the effect of history on people. So go from the macro to the micro, you know, and as I say, this book really, I think, helps us have that kind of discussion, since we'll see the effects, well, not only on Tim O'Brien, if he's a character, but all the others within the novel. Preceding, by the way, you know, that's preceding the war, and then the post-war, because he goes back and forth in time, so we can deal also with concepts of time, too, which we try to get into. Not as linear as we like to think. Okay. So anyway, that's the way I hope to use this book.
So what I have to say, even though I'm on the English side of the panel, has a lot to relate to it. So we were talking about the form, and I first read this book when I was in graduate school in the mid-90s, and this is my old copy, so you probably haven't seen this around. But as a graduate student studying the short story form, you can imagine this was very exciting. It was all the buzz, and we loved the experimental form, the experimental nature of this book, and it, you know, it wasn't it helped to invent, not necessarily invent, but validate a genre that had been unnamed thus far. It's, you know, it's not a traditional story collection in that, you know, it's kind of all over the place, and the stories are very related, even though these stories were published over the course of a decade in different journals and places. It doesn't follow the traditional novel because it's not cohesive and linear. So it's been called a few things, a composite novel, linked fictions, and we've seen more books like this come out over the past decade or so. And I was saying to Ron, you know, the 2009 Pulitzer Prize-winning book was a story of linked fictions. So this is a more common form of storytelling. So in my creative writing classes, which is mostly where I use this book, and that's what I'll talk about today, we talk about the form a lot, and we also talk about this metafictional voice in it, this narrator who is aware of the story that's being told and how it's being told. And that's, we compare it to some other writers. We read a Russell Banks piece and other metafiction, which is, of course, a very contemporary and postmodern way of telling a story. And so in some ways, we look at this book externally. We look at the form and the way it's put together and what that said, and where it, you know, where it is in terms of literary movements and that sort of thing. But we talk the most about it in terms of how it's related to the way we write. And the thing I've always loved about this book is, of course, it's a book of stories about war, although in How to Tell a True War Story, the narrator argues there's no real way to tell a true war story. But the subtext throughout is how to tell a story and why we tell stories and what's the best way to tell a story. And so it's very useful, as you can imagine, to story writers, fiction writers. And you know, the past couple days I was flipping through and reading some stories I haven't read for a while, and this morning I reread The Sweetheart of the Saint-Germain.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't read it or haven't read it for a while, it's basically a story about a young American woman named Mary Ann who supposedly goes to Vietnam. But the story is being told by a character named Rat Kiley. And he's telling this story, and there's one of the other guys named Mitchell Sanders who's just criticizing the way Rat Kiley's telling the story and saying, "You're telling it wrong, you're ruining it, don't tell it that way." And so the story is about Marianne primarily, but the sub-story is how can this story be told in the correct way? And I found this little passage where Mitchell Sanders is saying, you know, just tell us what happened to Marianne. Stop explaining, stop analyzing, you're ruining it. And I thought this is what we talk about in writing classes all the time. I'm going to bring that into my writers on Thursday. We talk about something, we call it showing, not telling, but basically a story needs to be revealed through a character's actions or reactions and concrete sensory detail, and resist that urge to get in there and explain what it's all about. So this book is full of that. This book is full of good advice on telling stories and writing. And the other way it comes into play, there's a piece in here called Good Form, which is one of the smaller pieces kind of sandwiched between longer stories. We also talk a lot about how our own truth and our own real world experience, how it influences our fiction, and where's the gray space between the two, and how do they connect. And in that particular piece, the narrator is, he's talking about why he became a writer, and he's also talking about the difference between happening truth and story truth. Happening truth being what really happened, and story truth being how that is distorted or skewed, added to, taken away. So what is left is a story that's somehow more truthful emotionally for the reader, even if it's been changed from what originally happened. And Good Form is a great thing to get us talking about that. And this whole book just, you know, what you were saying, it just plays with what's true and what's not, and how are we telling it and why we're telling it. I mean, just the fact that, you know, Tim O'Brien's the writer's name and the narrator throughout is O'Brien, so, but we can't assume, of course, that it's autobiographical. And he even plays with it in the front pages. I mean, there's that disclaimer in the beginning that says, this is a work of fiction. All of the names, all of the characters, all the situations, and he says, are imaginary, which I think is an interesting word to use. And then 2 pages later, it says, this book is dedicated to the men of Alpha Company. And it's all the characters' names, Henry Dobbins, Mitchell Sanders, Rat Kiley, Norman Bowker. And we know that dedications are usually made to real people. So even there, he's playing with what's truth and what's not. All good stuff for young fiction writers to think about.
Well, I'm using the book in all 3 of my classes. In 217, the contemporary writers, you know, we talk about as readers how we respond to this idea of somebody writing about something that really happened, but in a fictional way. So we talk about metafiction. And then I'm using it in 1 and 2 and English 101. I wanted to talk about English 101 and how I use it in that class. The 2 stories that I'm using primarily, that I'm using in this course, are The Rainy River and Sweetheart of Song Travan. I thought Rainy River would be a perfect story for the 101 student, because usually students who are taking 101 have just come out of high school, most of them, and this semester I happen to have, you know, all just students who are probably like 18, 19, 20, and the story is about a young person who has to make a decision, about whether to go to war or go off to Canada, because he's just received a draft notice. And so I have them read that story. We talk about the story, and we just got done doing that, and students responded quite well to it. And then the assignment is for them to write about crossroads that they're at. They're at a crossroads in their life, and they have to think about, you know, they have to write about how they made this decision, what happened in their life. And I've received some good topics. I have one student who's writing about how she had to make a decision on whether she has a 1-year-old son who's deaf, and the doctor has given her the option of whether to do a cochlear implant for him or not. And so she's writing about how she came to that decision. So it's yielding some good topics. The other story, Sweet's Heart of the Song Trebong, as Betsy just described it, is the story of a woman who goes over to Vietnam. But the story is such a bizarre story that it's almost unbelievable. Like, how can someone call their girlfriend over in the middle of war, right? They are going to read that story and watch the movie Soldier's Sweetheart that's based off of that story. And this, I just wanted to back up a little bit and say that this story gave me the opportunity to try out something new. I've never had my students do a compare-contrast, or I don't want to say never, but in recent years I haven't had students do a compare-contrast essay. So I thought, well, why don't I try that now? And so I opened up an opportunity where I'm having them compare the story to the movie, in that which one presents a more believable story. Is it the actual written version, or the film version of it? And we'll talk about how they do that. So that's how I'm using it in 101.
Question and answers. Oh. Discussion, how other people are using the book perhaps.
I have a comment, no question. Farrah, I was thinking about the idea that you just mentioned, comparing the film to the short story, and I was thinking about how the extra benefit that students are getting in 101 for that is they're getting an opportunity to work with another source.
Yeah.
Right, and kind of practice for 102
Mm-hmm.
and other classes where they're going to use other sources. I'm sure you're going to be dealing with MLA in terms of the story and in terms of the film, so they'll get some documentation practice. I think it's a nice way for students to get some of that in a more low stakes maybe situation than sort of the all-powerful research paper that people get real stressed out about.
Yeah, and they always enjoy watching that film.
Right.
So.
How long is the film, Farrah? Is it a feature length or short story version of the?
Is it 90?
It is feature length.
It's actually 2 years, yeah. It's 2 years.
I kind of wanted to ask a general question for the panel of people in it. So, of course, I'm always trying to get more and more people to use the book, especially while the projects expand. Could you talk about, or maybe some people who haven't adopted it, or maybe they're new to campus, some of maybe the challenges and the benefits of incorporating the Common Reader into your curriculum that generally is already planned? And what is it like to make that shift to put in this new element?
I could talk to that. You guys don't mind. I feel like having the one book is gives me something to work with in terms of coming up with new ideas. Every summer I grapple with the idea of, okay, I've got to do something new. I want to do something different. What shall I do? What shall I do? So having the one book allows me to center my ideas around that. I can sort of take that book and say, okay, I'll take the story. I like this. How can I work around this aspect of it? I've done all three of the one books. I haven't used the whole of all of the books. I've used portions of them. So that's a benefit to me, to be able to center my ideas around it for a new semester.
I've also found that, have you noticed that when you assign it or when you're starting to work on it, that students will say, oh, I'm reading this in my blah blah class? And that, I think, really helps on a number of levels, in that all of a sudden they're starting to see interdisciplinary connections with a text and different pedagogical approaches to learning about that text. And even better, for retention, they're having a conversation amongst themselves, because I'll let them go for a little bit and say, well, they're using it in my sociology class, and I'll say, how are they doing that? And then two students will say, oh, we're both in that class. So they do it this way, and they'll sort of crosstalk a little bit about how they're reacting to it and being a little evaluative about how they like it or dislike it or what have you, and then other students will talk about it, and it starts this discussion in which they're a community. They see themselves as part of a community of peers that are, and they're talking about something that isn't just bitching about parking. You know, and it's really great, and that I think is really good for our students to make those connections that maybe when the bell rings at the end of class they might walk out and have a cup of coffee because they see themselves as part of something bigger than just this class.
I've seen that even more now, this time around than the previous two books, and I don't know what the difference is, but I've already had students saying, oh, I'm reading this for such and such, or I read it for that, or I used it in my English class last year. And I think it helps students see the value of liberal arts and a general education, that there's something more than, you know, this happened in this year and I'm going to choose B on the multiple choice test, that they actually have to think with each other and come to some general conclusions, or not, because they aren't just cramming for a particular test anymore. They're talking about something on a much different level. I love it.
It's not one damn fact after another.
It's not.
Another benefit, by the way, which connects with this, is that since we have a number of events related to the one book, that students can connect to what's happening in the college community. So, and which I'd like to point out, I do that especially at College Success Seminar, but any course. So telling them that they can go see Brand's play coming up, or telling them that the author is going to be here by Skype, or that we're going to have a panel that President Sprague is going to moderate, right? Well, so we have these various events that they can attend. It kind of gets them out and realize that college is more than just taking a class. So as you pointed out, we not only have a dialogue among classes, but we have a dialogue in the community. And I think it's very exciting. I remember when we had the one with Persepolis, we took our CSS class to the author who was at Wheaton. They're still talking about it. I mean, they were so excited to see a real author. They had never seen a real author, you know, books come from God. You know. So anyway, that's a real value.
I think there's something else with the things they carry that resonates with them. We're in, depending on your count, 2.5 wars.
Yeah.
And a number of these students know people who are deployed, are going to deploy, or who have come back. And so the things they carry, whether it's true or not, resonates with them in a very real way. And it's partially curiosity, it's partially, is this what it's like? Because there is no draft. There's no pressure around them like that. They see that in the book.
I think especially for BCC, probably everyone knows it, but we have more veterans at BCC than any other college, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, in all of southern New England, so, and that includes Rhode Island and Connecticut. So you probably have a vet in your class, or you probably have someone who is a spouse or a significant other or parent of a vet, and I think that's also a bit unusual.
In the introduction, I teach a lot online, and they have to introduce themselves. And so you always get little windows into who they are, and there's a significant number with deployed boyfriends, spouses, fiancés on the verge of deploying, or I hope they come back safe. So I'm not using the book per se, because I'm kind of married to this reader that they all love, and I hate to give it up. You know, when students say they like a book and they actually read it, you kind of want to hug it a while. But this is on the list of optional additional readings for review with focus questions. So I really think it talks to their hearts right now in a real way that maybe some of the others didn't directly.
Yeah, I'm working with reading classes. My voice is off, but we opened this week in one of the reading 090 classes, and particularly used the first chapter, the things they carried, because part of reading 090 is understanding some of the things that are the nature of text. And one of the good things about the first chapter is it's very categorical. And the whole idea that written language, it can, particularly in texts, particularly in textbooks, is organized categorically. And those 4 categories, and there's I can't remember the 4th one, necessity, rank, superstition, what's the 4th one? But anyhow, I had them, you know, we read actually the first 7 pages out loud to them, because that's a lot of times how we start. And then we had them talk about the things they carry in those 4 categories. And it really created wonderful conversation. And it's a way we can link to moving from oral to written language, which is a big piece of understanding, moving to text comprehension for our students. And again, because it crosses, as you folks have been saying, and thank you, by the way, you gave me some great new ideas, so this was a wonderful panel. But one of the most important things, of course, with the reading course is engagement. So many of our students in 090 have never read a complete book, or haven't read a complete book in a long time, since Harry Potter, maybe. But so that having some reading that has a factual basis, but also has fictional components, and talking about that difference, talking about story, and that story is the natural nature of human communication, and that how story became text, and you know, looking at things in categories is a big piece of that. So it was a really successful session, and the students really felt engaged. So I'm really excited about using it. And the On the River one is also another one I think we'll really deal with next time.
Last semester I had a Friday night class, late Friday afternoon, where I think 3 or 4 of my students came from Afghanistan and Iraq. And when they had the opportunity to do a narrative essay, to write a narrative essay, they wrote about how they survived in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in some cases, in many cases, came back with the post-traumatic stress syndrome and were somewhat incapacitated or disabled from this. And in some cases, they saw their friends die in their arms. And I think that the narrative essay was fairly cathartic for them. And I think teaching sections of this book will certainly inform the 090 and 101 classes that I have. Because I saw that coming more and more to the fore, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds writing about this.
That's what raises an issue I was thinking about. We have 2 psychology people, but it's for everybody, which is when we assign a book like this, or Howard and I run into this with our Holocaust class, we don't know what it's going to spark. And if we have vets, for example, or others who have gone through traumatic experiences, how we may deal with that, because you know we want to share, we want people to express themselves, but we know things are not necessarily always cognitively rational, and people have lots of reactions. So I don't know if anybody has some ideas about how we might deal with someone reacting to this because it was, you know, re-stimulated, something got re-stimulated.
I had a Vietnam vet who just absented himself for the period during which we covered Vietnam. Then he came back. He didn't want to deal with it from a antiseptic, historical viewpoint because it was such a personal experience for him. And I think that's something that vets don't self-identify. You know, they don't walk around with little VETs on their forehead. And in many cases, they don't want to today. And I mean, you know, during the Vietnam War, we didn't want to. I went on campus in a uniform and wished hadn't taken leave of my senses during this period. So they really don't want to say, I'm a vet. So what you have to do is really be kind of sensitive and aware of what you're dealing with. They're not all men. A lot of them are women. They are not necessarily 18 or 19. A lot of them are 25, 27, 28 because they're in the National Guard and the unit is deployed and they're gone. So it's not a minefield, but it's something that I think we need to be sensitive to and cognizant of with our assignments when we're asking people. And if somebody's having real trouble with it, all you have to do is say to them, you know, here's the assignment, you have to write on the ordinary soldier's experience. You know, I call it the working men's war in Vietnam. And I want 3 to 5 pages. But if you're having particular trouble with this assignment, you need to speak with me privately and we'll talk about where you can go with it. As long as you keep the door open, I think people will come through it.
I can't recite it from memory, but I have specific language in my syllabus addressing that very issue, because within our normal psychology class, it's a given.
Yeah.
It's right there in black and white.
Oh, I love that normal psych. I have the neuroses of the week.
I think in a writing class, if it's a fiction writing class, we can all kind of, I remind students to assume that what they're reading about, even if it's in a first-person narrator, it's a persona, it's a mask. We can't assume it's about the person who wrote it. Even if somehow we know some autobiographical information about them and it kind of fits. And, well, this book helps us talk about that. And, you know, when I talk about the O'Brien character in here, I call him the narrator. I don't call him the writer for that reason. And so making that distinction is important, but I also think because it's a fiction writing class, perhaps maybe people are presenting intimate and disturbing details of their lives, but they know they're safe because we can't assume they're real, you know? So it's kind of, in a strange way, we don't talk about whether it's real or not. We do in terms of this book, but when a story's on the table, it's assumed that there's the writer and then there's the narrator.
There's some comfort in that cushion.
Yes, yeah, and generally students don't offer that, which I think the hard thing is if it just comes up in class. That's the hard thing to deal with. If someone in class starts behaving in a way or saying something or gets upset, the on the spot,
Right.
you know, it's difficult.
Again, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, in the online environment, the on the spot can sometimes have been 3 hours before. And it's just a really difficult fine line to walk to make sure that you catch it and you catch responses. It doesn't have anything directly to do with the things they carry, but when there are comments about social services and people ripping it off, you have to, and I guess it would go to this, comments about the forever war, you know, and the problems in Afghanistan and the rest of it. When there's a posting and somebody's got a loved one over there, there's an automatic reaction to it, and it's one of those fine lines that I think we need to walk as faculty. Always pull it back to not dispassionate, but the events. You know, I love the book, and maybe because it talks to me, and I don't care if it's real or not. The things they carried,
I mean,
yeah, the things they carried is what people did. I was reasonably young when the first Marine MAB went to Da Nang. And I didn't know this Marine from a hill of beans. And he begged me to write him. So I wrote him every day. When he died over there, his buddies returned my letters to me. Now, my letters weren't anything. They were chatty. I was chatty Cathy, for crying out loud. I was about as vapid as you could imagine. But it was something that connected him in a real way because he was scared. And that's what pops off the page to me when I read the things they carry, is the palpable fear in the stories. You know, even though sometimes it's clean and kind of, there's this undercurrent of fear. that they never seem to put down. So the things they carry is the fear. And it's tough to get your students to understand that. You know, it really is. But I'm sorry. Whoop. Didn't mean to say anything like that, but.
You have something?
Maybe it pales in comparison.
No.
No, I was just interested in, I'm brand new here, so this is my first one book experience, and I teach all biology courses. So it's hard to sell them, sort of, right? They're kind of overwhelmed at that point in time with, we have to memorize these 1,000 facts, and I'm not reading the other book. But one opportunity that I've been given, which I'm fortunate, is I'm sort of kind of revving up again the biotechnology program. And the first class I've been giving is just a lecture series at night. And I think some of them forget, like we talk about the origins of the first biotech company in Genentech in California, and what the basis, what the social climate behind all of these corporations starting was and is. And I think it might be interesting, and I know it's late in the game, but I'm going to try to incorporate a lot of, I was at the VA hospital in Providence before this, bringing in some of the amputees from Iraq and Afghanistan and realizing that a lot of this regenerative medicine and modern biotechnology plays into this. You know what I mean? Like my classes tend to think that this has nothing to do with biology. It has everything to do with biology too. Even in the first chapter, they talk about sending lice home and all the rot and the smell of the bag, like in my micro class, you know, even that plays in. So I'm hoping to incorporate some of this, but in the future it might be kind of interesting to go towards the biology, go towards the science side and tie it in, because it seems like when they get to those classes, they turn off that switch with everything else pretty much, besides committing facts to memory. So
Psychology is considered such a soft science compared to biology, but even in psychology there's some resistance at first. I don't know if you found that, Fred, but I found it in Psych 101. There is this resistance, like, this is not an English class. We're not supposed to be studying stuff. So
they don't want to hear it.
I can imagine you would get it even worse, but personally I love your ideas. They sound really great.
You know what, too, it really, like the first biotech class, we did a similar thing where you introduce yourself, and we used the discussion forums, which I've been fortunate, another faculty member introduced me to how she was using those. But many of the students, they really are vocalizing, they want, even in biology, to have a literature-based class. They're asking me about all these books, have I read these books, have I seen these movies on, you know, genetically modified food and things like Gattaca, you know, 10, 15 years ago. Things that's in myself too. I have certain popular culture references that I pull into my lectures, so it is interesting how much they do overlap, you know, seemingly completely different topics. But I'd hope, because a lot of my colleagues in biology and math, I think we feel separated from some of the topics, but I think we need to draw those people in, because it would sort of bring all the disciplines together, so to speak.
Oh, I think that's a brilliant suggestion. We all sort of live in our little silos, don't we? That's a brilliant suggestion.
And isn't that the idea of the one book? To bring us together in different ways. So that's a great idea.
That kind of picks up on the point Tom made about the interconnectedness of an educated person, and to draw these as a leitmotif through all of your courses. I mean, despite a little thing like academic freedom, we should be considering demanding a book, you know, be required in all of these courses and the various perspectives that we bring. You know, the biological perspective and psychology and English and history. This is a real, to me, it's been a very valuable dimension of the one book period, let alone a particular book in a particular year. But they see they're not going to ever remember the date of the Treaty of Kuchuk-Kanarji when they're out, you know, but they could remember the interconnectedness of it, and I think this is a terrific way to do it. Now Vietnam, I don't know whether it's despite the searing experience it was for America and for some of us of a certain age, I'm not sure it's in their mindset the way the way we grew, kind of matured with Vietnam as a shadow over everything. I was walking down the hall, and a student, I don't know if it's you, Mo, or someone required we were soldiers, young and gay,
yes.
I'm walking by, the student had it in his arm. I said, oh, I was there in July of '65, you know, and spent my birthday in Iridrang Valley. And he looked at me like I was in the Peloponnesian Wars. So, you know, despite the importance of Vietnam per se, I think the important thing is the more general level of the educational value, pulling us through all of our courses and all the various. This is a valuable, very valuable lesson for our students and for us as we participate.
I'd like to say this is where we shine for ES because it fits so well in their questions for our upcoming accreditation process. Is what are students doing extracurricularly and co-curricularly that fit in with our educated person, our gen ed requirements and all that. And this is a shining example of how the college has connected those concepts concretely. So check that out.
Maybe we could connect it even more fully by when we decide on a one book for next year, do it by departments. You know, have somebody from one book come in and talk about connecting the genetic alterations, the problems. Somehow everything's biology, everything's English, everything is psychology. And I'd like to think that our mother discipline of history, everything's history, and math comes up because I can't do math. So, but math is also extraordinary. I mean, it all fits. And we just sometimes need to think outside of our little boxes as to how to make it fit. You know, we don't have to squeeze it in, it fits, but sometimes we don't think broad enough. Yeah.
I was going to say, Katie, as you, right before you brought up your excellent points of how to integrate this into science, I was thinking Division 5 typically does get left out of this kind of conversation, so I love everything that you said, and it's why it's so wonderful to have the newbies on board. You know, they bring a fresh perspective to everything, so that's really fabulous. I think it's as you guys also mentioned the phrase connected, and of course you know where my brain goes when I hear that word, connected college. I'm thinking Title III. Wouldn't this be an idea somehow to kind of bring it into the first year experience requirement? Maybe we could have some kind of required book or something that could connect with the first year experience. Yeah. So that's something to bring back to Katie as our first year experience person and our CSS 101 group as well. So good ideas all. Thank you.
Excellent.
I was just asking Farah, you know, do you make them buy the whole book? And I think if it was a required book, that just then they would have it. Obviously, they're not going to rebuy it if they have more than one course, but I think sometimes my guess is faculty might stay away from it because they know they can't fit the whole book in. There might be not enough time to read that whole book in the span of the rest of their curriculum, but there's one story, or there's one chapter, there's one part. Having it just be a required book for, and it's generally, they're literary books, they're inexpensive and can be in paperback. And that would take away that pressure from faculty to feel like, I have to make this worth them paying the money if they just had it.
That's an excellent point, because I think we all worry about the cost of textbooks.
But that's on Google Books, and it's free.
Yeah.
So they can just go there and read a story or two, and they don't have to pay.
Yeah.
But you know, that brings up another idea too with respect to learning communities. You know, building a learning community specifically around the one book, so they buy it one time, but it's for 3 classes. You know, that's another way to possibly approach this down the line.
Colleges provide the book to the CSS students, you know, the seminar course or the orientation course that they have to take. Like they give it out to.
We did that with Tuesdays with Maury. We give out quite a number as the prizes and whatnot at the kickoff and the orientations that summer.
Well, what a great discussion. The hour has come, I think. I was thinking of so many things as you were talking, and one of them was, you know, each one teach one. Because, you know, you're here, thank you so much, so that means you have an interest in and open-mindedness to incorporating a brand new thing into your general coursework, even in biology or maybe math. Or, and it's up to everyone really to just have an open mind to adopt it in if they're going to. And there's great ambassadors right in this room. For some courses like English or psych or sociology, it's an easy fit, but it's harder and requires additional thinking, additional conversation. But it seems like it's worthwhile. So first of all, thanks Elaine for the sweets and the coffee. And yes, that's right. And thanks especially to our great panelists. And to all of you. It's so wonderful to have a room full of people. Thanks, and stay tuned for lots of great events.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.